I'm Will. I care a lot about board games. I've designed board games. I did a PhD in game design. I've been playing games my whole life. And today's talk is why do board games matter to autonomous worlds? And the sense of not only why do they matter, but why am I bothering to tell you about them? And it's because board games are fundamentally anti-mimetic. You're not going to hear about them on their own because they're hard to learn, they're hard to tell people about, and people usually get bored of them after about 6 or 12 plays, and so they don't spread, and you have to actively seek to learn more about them. And they're really good for crypto because they are meant to run in people's brains, which are almost as slow as the EVM a lot of the time. And these small computations are quite useful in thinking about scoring or movement or map management. Whereas like video games can have all these complex number crunching things going on in the background, humans are the RAM and the hardware and the hard drive and the CPU that runs games. So we also have slow asynchronous play with board games. And that happens to be how our blockchains operate, right? Real time is not our friend so much as turn-based. And by default, the turn-based strategy genre is what board games offer. They also have sufficient PMF. So I'm not trying to tell you to adapt games that nobody is playing. There is really exciting product market fit for board games, even though most people don't know about that because they're not in board game circles. Because again, they're anti-mimetic. The problem with board games, which I'll briefly gloss over, is that we have no board games with unlimited players, which we would really like for autonomous worlds. We have no board games with rolling admission, where there's meaningful ways to just jump into a game that's already happening, or at least very limited ones. And we have no board games with never-ending play, and I know a lot of people are looking for never-ending play in their autonomous worlds. I was really happy to see Kushaba shill for the opposite earlier. Okay, so what I basically I'm going to do is take for inspiration for this talk, the Spiel des Jahres. You should look into it. It's the prize for best game of the year. Essentially, in 1980, Ravensburger was super tired of paying the Parker brothers for the rights to publishing Monopoly and wanted to discover new board games where it could make bigger margins. So it created a prize for the best game of the year. And the first few games were not very good, but they won prizes and got published. But today, the world of board game design has gotten so advanced that we now have really excellent games, and I'm going to show a few of them. And I'm also going to show what they're sort of rallying against and how bad sort of legacy board games are. So just thinking about Monopoly, it has a runaway winner problem. Very quickly, one player will have too much capital and will use that capital to get more capital, and it will be very hard to catch up. That is not fun. Board games also have, like Monopoly, unknown lengths. You don't want to have a game that lasts between 45 minutes and 3 hours, which is what Monopoly advertises as the length of its possible play. We are social human beings who need to plan our schedules, and that kind of time variance is insane. Player elimination. Again, we are social human beings looking to have fun together. This game kicks people out of our social circle and makes them not play while we eliminate them. Very bad design. Random turns. You don't get to decide where you move. The game tells you where you move. Why? That's not worth it. Okay, so we had all these things that were bad, and so we started coming up with new kinds of games. And the first game I'm going to show you is called Scotland Yard from 1983, and it decided to make this interesting innovation. And for the rest of this talk, I'm going to tell you about board game innovations very quickly to help stir your mental creativity and maybe urge you to play some on your own to discover new mechanics in interesting ways. So, one versus many. In Scotland Yard, people are hunting a bad guy. They are detectives, and they're trying to figure out where the bad guy is. The bad guy is a player, but detectives are also players. And this genre has been repeated with Jack the Ripper and detectives multiple times, Dracula and people trying to kill Dracula multiple times through different iterations, but it is a cool genre, and it's rare in video games, but also exists. Asymmetric abilities. Not every player needs to have the same starting abilities. That is a cool idea. And again, things like Monopoly or Risk generally give people the same equal footing, but what if we give people different footings? Common in video games, but became common in board games only much later. Deducing hidden movement. So people move in this game, and you don't know where they moved, and you're trying to figure it out through clues and through opportunities they had. So previous deduction games like Clue were not very exciting. It was just sort of like brute forcing getting information until you had sufficient information to determine what the result was. Here, you have to actually puzzle through like the geometry of the game to figure out where the other person could be. Okay, next game, El Grande, 1996. In this game, you are placing cubes on a map. If you have the most cubes in a space, you win that space and you get points from that space. It's called gerrymandering as a mechanic in my mind, which is basically you want to win every location by only 1 point. If you win by 10 points, that means there's a whole bunch of locations you could have won, but didn't. Very cool to push people into gerrymandering. Unintuitive playing areas. In this game, you cannot play on the square where the king is. That's the king. But you can play on all the regions around him, and you cannot play on any of the regions that are not around him. And play throughout the game will change where the king is and change where the map can be played. That's cool. And also strange. And that's actually something I would like to mention is that board games don't need to simulate reality, and neither do your games. You can have very strange, unintuitive rules that lead to exciting and interesting player interactions. Okay, action drafting and order drafting. I actually have a second slide for this one because it's kind of cool. In this game, there's going to be a random set of moves every turn, and players are going to auction for the turn order to select which moves they want. And moves will have varying abilities and varying amounts of influence that they can place. And the way you auction is not with like a money supply, but a deck of 13 cards, and you can use only each card once. And this is something people have done in games to reduce randomness of a dice. Instead of giving you a die of like, let's say 6 sides, let's give you 6 cards, and you choose when you roll the 1. Once you've rolled the 1, you can't roll it again until you've rolled the 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So lots of ways to remove things like monopolies, complete removal of an intelligent choice. Okay, next one, Torres, 1999. Pie growing versus pie eating. In this game, players are placing castle pieces, and they're also trying to climb the castle with their pieces. You score based on how high your piece is on a castle and the surface area of your castle. You have a choice. You can make the castle big and score lots of points, or you can climb it and score lots of points. It's easier to grow the castle than to climb it, but if you grow a castle and then someone else climbs your castle, you grew the pie and didn't eat it. You grew the pie for someone else. That's an interesting relationship that Wolfgang Kramer discovers in several of his games, including Tikal, which also won Game of the Year, but I didn't mention here. Dynamically created board. Players in this game are building the board as they go. That is cool. And then action points. I have a little action here. Every player gets 5 actions per turn. And then they have a bunch of things they can do with those actions. They can put a piece onto the board. They can move a piece. They can put a piece of castle to the board. They can draw a card. They can discard, play a card. And they can also just waste their actions moving their score counter forward. This is actually really useful for blockchain gaming because when you give players many action points, they can compose quite a giant turn and then form only one transaction. And so there's fewer moves being pushed to the chain at the same time. Or fewer transactions, but many more moves being pushed to the chain at the same time. Okay, Agricola, 2008. This game is a great example of worker placement. Didn't invent it. In worker placement, you have 5 pieces. There's like 20 spots on the board. You choose which spot you want to use to do your action. Once you've chosen it, no one else can do it. And that's basically leads you to prioritize where you're going to put your pieces, when, based on what everybody else wants and what moves are available. It's a brilliant genre, and I highly recommend everybody play at least one worker placement once. You can do things like have extra workers throughout the gameplay and increase the complexity of the game as you scale the number of workers. Very cool. Okay, tableau management. In tableau management, what you get is as players buy buildings or upgrades or cards, they build a personal representation of their abilities and powers. And what that lets you do is sort of create your own little world, like your own little Sim City, like your own little strategy or machine for how you're going to win. And the tableau management genre exists across many successful games. Also recommend you look through it. Okay, now the goal of this talk is really to say we have tons of really interesting design that's available to everybody, but it's super hard to get access to because these ideas don't spread. They're hard to learn about, they're hard to think about, and nobody really has the time to bring 4 players together to learn a new game. So how do you get past this? How do you think through this? Well, you have to just play them. And you have to find local board game cafes, or you have to start local board game clubs to figure out what we got. Okay, I've got 3 minutes. So my final thought is like, do autonomous worlds need to be perpetual? But it's part of a larger question that I'm asking, which is, what kinds of sacrifices can we make to the ideal autonomous world to take in board games, and not just the good things they bring, but also the bad things that I mentioned earlier, which are that there's no board games that last forever, right? There's no autonomous world game. So the way Skystrife does it is it thinks, let's have many different game instances, let's let them resolve, and then collapse to some meta level world. I think that's probably a better approach for a more designable early game. And how do we get to benefit from the composability of board games with crypto? Well, we get this exciting moment where once a game, like a board game, is fully on-chain, its rules are fully available for modding, alteration, and its props can be reused, and we can design new and quicker and alternative ways of playing those same games and mod them to find exciting, composable experiences, and then we can tokenize them. That's my thought, guys. If anybody has any questions, I can take one, I guess, because we have time for one.
Yeah, there's time for questions.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any games that you missed?
Why tokenization?
Oh, I think that we need to coordinate around making games on autonomous worlds. I think the problem with open source finance before DeFi was that we couldn't monetize or determine what the canonical open source instance of that financial instrument was. And the same can happen to crypto games. So if we think of open source game design, it's actually not really a thing and has not been very successful because we haven't been able to find an economic model to sustain it. But if we can think about tokenizing open source games so that we can then coordinate people around building on them and then capturing value with those tokens together, we can produce a new push towards collaborative, creative co-making, because we can make money with it.